JourneyTEAM, we've been around for 29 years, 350 plus active customers just within the last year, as well as about 130 and growing team members currently underneath the JourneyTEAM umbrella. With 90% referenceable customers, 4 solution partner designations from Microsoft, as well as 1,300 plus projects completed in the last 5 years, we have an excellent team of Microsoft consultants that can help a variety of Microsoft needs. Now, we've been recognized by Microsoft multiple times. So we've been Partner of the Year in consecutive years, as you can see, 2019 and 2020, as well as being included in the 2021-22 Inner Circle, which gives us the eyes and ears, as well as the option to provide feedback to Microsoft directly based on product enhancements, future roadmaps, etc., as well as being recognized as one of the top places to work. Now, under the JourneyTEAM umbrella, we support a variety of Microsoft needs. Now, today we're going to be specifically focusing on Business Central, as well as some SharePoint and collaboration content, as well as the distribution of approvals, etc. But for any and all additional Microsoft needs, whether it be ERP, the customer engagement, any cloud or security, collaboration and content, as well as data and Power BI functionality, there's resources available here in case you have questions or even thoughts for future projects that we can help contribute on. Now, I'm going to include the survey in the chat here in just a moment. Now I'm going to turn the time over to our presenters for them to give a chance to introduce themselves.
Okay, great. I think I'll introduce myself now and leave the introduction for Jeffrey and Scott when they do their portions. But my name's Grant Brimhall. I've worked with JourneyTEAM for almost 3 years. I lead our development team, have had about 20 years experience on Business Central and its predecessors, Nav, Navision, and Avista, and just recently have moved over to the partner space as a consultant. What we want to talk about today, obviously, while you're all here, is workflows in Business Central. And what you can use workflows for in Business Central is to connect business processes, tasks that are performed separately by different users. So system tasks such as automatic posting, tasks where you need to get documents approved, like a purchase order or purchase invoice before it can get sent to the vendor or paid. Any of those things that require steps to be completed by different users. You can link all those steps in a workflow and make sure everything, all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed before a document goes out the door or is paid, or anything that needs to happen. And then, of course, throughout the journey of that workflow, as people need to be notified that it's their turn to complete something, or as something is completed and someone just needs to know that it's ready, there's places baked in where those notifications can happen. So here's a couple examples where you can use workflows: approving sales and purchase documents, approving accounting journals. You can approve creation or changes to customers' items or vendors. The customer one that always comes up is credit limits. You can have an approval that if a credit limit needs to be adjusted, you could work that into a workflow approval, or say a vendor payment address. That could be worked into workflow approval as well. And then obviously the notifications of users throughout the workflow steps, you can add those, make sure those are happening throughout, so that people that need to understand what's happening, or if it hasn't happened, you can keep everyone informed. So diving down just a little bit into approving documents, what a typical document approval workflow would look like is, if I'm a purchasing clerk writing say a PO, then after I've written the PO, there'd be an action button inside of Business Central that I could click to submit it for approval, which would move over into the purchase manager's queue. Jeffrey will talk a little bit about, you can have either one person review it or a team review it. But anyway, just for sake of argument, there's a one person review here. And then once they approve it, then the purchase order can then be sent off to the vendor. Another example is approving accounting journals. So same very basic flow is you have a clerk entering a journal, whether that's just a monthly GL journal like an accrual that needs to be posted and reviewed, or perhaps it's your weekly check run that somebody needs to produce the checks and have evaluated. Once that journal's ready to go, then they can submit it for approval. Again, you can have one or multiple people in a group be responsible for that review. And once they've done their approvals, then you could even set up automatic posting of journals. A question I saw pop up there about item journals, I don't think that's baked into standard BC, but it's certainly one that as a partner we could take the out of the box approvals that's in there and probably replicate that or apply it to item journals, but it'd just be something we'd need to take a look at. As we talked about a moment ago, items, customers, and vendors, simply with creation of a customer, before a customer could be used on a document, you could make sure that you send that customer through for approval. In the case of editing a customer, say you needed to edit a customer's credit limit, one person could go through and request that credit limit increase. As that credit limit increase is being evaluated, the customer still retains its original values, and everything about that customer for while the approval's happening just goes about its way under the old credit limit. But then once that approval has been or once that credit limit request has been approved, then from that point forward, the customer would have a new credit limit, and then the customer would behave under the guise of that new credit limit from that point forward. And then, of course, throughout the workflow steps, you can program in notifications. So when it's your turn, if you're the manager and you need to approve something, when it's your turn, you'll get a notification through email. That notification, when you click on it, it'll take you to the document, the customer, the vendor, the general journal, whatever it is that's necessary, and then you'll have a chance to review and approve it inside of Business Central. So the things I've talked about there, I've tried to stay away from the mechanics of the workflows, because the purpose of this meeting here is to talk through the two different mechanics that are available to you. One is the workflow, what BC has internally to build those workflow steps, and then what if what BC has internally doesn't meet your needs, you may have a little more complexity in how you want to route your workflows, then you can use Power Automate. And so, but from the user's perspective, the user won't really care whether your workflow was driven by a Business Central workflow or whether it was driven by a Power Automate workflow, because in the case of, say, a purchase order, if you're not using workflows, basically your step as, say, someone that's writing a purchase order is you write your purchase order and then you release it, signifying, hey, I'm done. It's in the warehouse's court, it's in the vendor's court. I've sent the purchase order off to the vendor. But now in the case of when you turn on workflows, instead of just releasing it, instead you're going to click this send approval request. And whether your purchase order approval request was architected with the native BC workflow engine or through the Power Automate workflow engine, as a user, you don't care. You're just going to click that send approval request. It's going to go throughout its way, and then once it's approved, you'll end up with a release document, and then you go forward from there, and it's in the warehouse's court. You send it off to the vendor, and you wait for it to get received. So just from an introduction to workflows, that's all I have to share. And I guess the main takeaway is just that BC has a workflow engine that you can put, or BC has a means whereby you can send a document or a customer or vendor through an approval request, and whether you architect that through BC's native workflow engine, which Jeffrey will show you here now, or through a Power Automate workflow, which Scott will show you toward the latter half. Either way, from the user's point of view, it comes down to just doing your work and then sending off for approval and waiting for that request. So that's all I have for now, and I will turn it over to Jeffrey.
Great, thanks, Grant. So I'm just going to take a little bit of time, I guess, do a quick introduction, not to bore anybody. I have 25 plus years experience in supply chain operations management prior to going into consulting specifically for the BC product. I have about 8 years experience with Navision, the predecessor to BC, and of course now BC, which has been around about 4 years, roughly. So that's just a little bit about me. I just want to go through the built-in workflows that BC offers. And just to kind of talk about, they have a lot of pre-configured workflows. So there's just a list here of some that are available out of the box. Everything from your purchase documents to things that are specific to the customer, like Grant has talked about, sales orders, your journals. So you can see there's quite a bit here. Mostly I get to work with purchasing and sales because that seems to be the one where we want everybody to approve certain documents. So these are all pre-configured templates that Microsoft has put into BC that lets you use and easily set up a simple approval workflow. The first thing that you do have to keep in mind when you're using workflows, and this is the most critical, is this table called approval user setup. And this needs to be populated, and most critical populated, these 3 fields, for any user who's going to send a document or a transaction for approval, as well as the individual that's going to be doing the approving. These 3 fields, just the user ID, if they have a salesperson or purchaser code, you put that in, and then their email. So these 3 pieces of information must exist in this approval user setup table in order for the workflows to function. So if, for instance, Grant was not set up in this table and he went to try to send a document for approval, it would error out. It wouldn't let him do that. And then, of course, vice versa, you can't send it to somebody for approval if they're not in this table as well. So just to start out, I'm going to show you a purchase invoice approval workflow. So this is for a purchase invoice. And of course, just simple. With the workflow active, they go to hit release. You'll notice you get the error, says, sorry, you can't release this because it's got to go through a workflow. Same thing, if they try to post this, you're going to get the same kind of error. It says it's got to be approved. It's got to go through the workflow. So when the workflow is active, it's going to keep from these documents being posted or processed till you go through and send it for the workflow. So you can see that it says that an approval has been sent. Now you can open up the fact pane on the side, and you can see it shows that the approval is open and who it's been sent to, when it was sent, so that you know who is supposed to be doing that approval piece. And as you can see, the document status says pending approval. So now at this point, the document is in that status until the approval takes place. So from the flip side, now looking at the person who's going to be doing the approving, they have two different notifications that can happen out of the box. The first is, which I'm going to show you on the home screen, it will show down at the bottom that they have a request to approve. The second is you can have an email go to that individual and they'll get a brief email that says that somebody's requesting an approval for that particular document. You can also make it so that the emails group all the approvals into a specific time frame. So I may be an AP clerk or a CFO, and I don't want to see approvals all day long. You can have the email grouped come to you at noon, and it would show all the approvals that are pending. So from the approver side, I can see here that I have an item that needs to be approved. I can open it up. I can see the document that's in there. I can open that document so that I can view it, see what I need to approve, make sure that I do approve. Now I can either approve it right here in the document, or I can approve it from the approve screen. And vice versa, I can reject it. I can place comments in there for the person who sent me the approval. So I'm going to go ahead and approve it. And you see I've approved it. It's now gone off of my approval screen. And if we go back into this particular document, you can see the approval has been cleared. So if we go in and look at the document, just open up the purchase invoice. So you can see that the status is now released, and the person can be notified that it was approved, and they can go ahead and process the document. Now, if you want, the approver can also process this document. They could do the posting if you want to do that as part of your process, but they don't have to. So just to give you a little bit of idea how to create a simple workflow, let's walk through. I just want to do a very simple approval for a purchase order. So when this particular user, whose name is Hank, when he creates a purchase order, before he can release and send off the purchase order, it has to go through an approval process. Whoops. Let's click the right buttons. Okay, so first of all, to create a workflow, you just search for workflows. And you can come in here. Generally, this will be blank unless you've set one up, and you're just going to click new, and then new workflow from template. Now here's that list of different documents and workflows that you can create just built out of the box. So it might be a customer, a sales order. Of course, we want the purchase order approval. So we're going to select that. It's now opened up that particular workflow and shows us all the workflow steps. Now I'm going to come in here and I want to designate who this is going to go to. So I'm going to open up the step and who it's being sent to, come down and tell it that I want it to go to a specific approver, because I want to approve everybody's POs. And so I'm going to select myself from that setup table. Then I'm also going to come in here and I want to be able to send a little notification. I want the person submitting the request to know that it's been submitted. Okay, so once that's set, then I just need to activate or enable the workflow. So click the switch to enable it. Now I can come out of my workflow and you'll see there that there's our new workflow for the purchase order and it says enabled yes. So now I have a workflow just for purchase orders. It'll walk through just like the first examples that I showed you, that when they finish the purchase order, in order to release it or process it, it has to be sent for approval first, and I would have to approve it. So another part of this is that you can have different approval types. So, and this is all based off of that user setup table that we talked about at the very beginning. So you'll notice this is very similar to, this is the screen that we went in and we set a specific approver. So there is an approval chain. And I'll show you a little bit later, but on the approval chain, this is where I can set up a user's direct approval and I can give limits based off of dollars, and it will walk through that chain based on who the qualified approvers are. So it would go to the first approver, and then if it doesn't need another approver, it would just get approved, or if it needs to go to a second or a third based on the criteria that I set up. I just see a quick question. Can you create a rule or policy like you cannot approve for 30 days and hold the item in the workflow for a specific area? You basically, the approval can be in there for as long as you want. You could put in a criteria that the approver can't approve it until a particular time frame went by. But I'd probably just, as part of your business process, know that you have to wait a certain time before you can approve it, and then you can push it on. The other is, if it is waiting, and that might be part of the question, same type of thing, you can put a time frame on your workflows that if they're not addressed in a certain period of time, it will either be pushed to a new person to do the approving or send out alerts to let people know, hey, you've got approvals in here that you're not taking care of and they need to be done. And at that point, they can either do it or you can push it to the next person in the approval chain so that that person can do the approving. The next type you can use is a direct approval. So a direct approver means that it's only going to go to the person's immediate approval. So in the approval setup, I can put like the direct manager for whoever is putting in the request. And so when they put in any kind of document, it'll go to their manager and just their manager, regardless of the limits, to be approved or not be approved. The other would be first qualified approval. So I may have my manager can only approve up to 5,000. Then the next person can approve, his manager can approve to 10,000, and the next one to 20,000. If my PO was $20,000 and I've set it to a first qualified approver, it'll skip the first two in that list and go to the person who's going to be able to do the approving. Where above in the approver chain, it would go through each one of those users until it reached the person who can do the final approval. And then, of course, the one I showed you in the example, which is the specific approver, and that's where you select the person you want it to go to, like I did in the purchase order. I select myself, and so any purchase order that goes through that workflow comes directly to that person to do the approving. Now, there is another function called workflow user group, and in this case, I go outside of that approval setup table and I create a group that I want my approvals to go through. So I could have a group of 5 people, and that purchase order will go to all 5 people. And I can have where only one of them needs to do the approval, and then it will approve it. I could do it that 2 of the 5 must approve it before it can go on through the next step, or I can have it step through a chain where it needs to go to one person first, the next person, the next person, and the next person. And so that's what we call a workflow user group. They're a little more difficult to set up because there are some things you need to do in the setup engine to accomplish whether you want one person to approve, multiple people to approve, or if you wanted to walk through the chain itself and go through the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. But the workflow groups is very useful because you may not be trying to do any other kind of criteria other than you needed to go through a certain group of people. So workflows can have, there are 2 main components of your workflow steps. The first one is the when event, and that's going to specify when you want to trigger the workflow. So built out of the box, there are certain actions that allow you to set the workflow so that it happens. So in the case, the example I showed you, I had to send it for approval. You can make it so that when they click release, it immediately goes for approval. So there are different actions that you can choose to trigger when that workflow is going to kick off. And then, of course, the next piece of it is called the on condition. I just call it the filter specifications. And that is this particular box, which you've probably seen if you've been in BC. It's, filters or criteria for all kinds of things. But in this case, what I can do is I can say, I only want the workflow to trigger when it's a certain vendor, or I only want the workflow to trigger if it's a certain item or a certain dollar amount. So I have some people that say, well, we only require it for certain vendors, or maybe only certain customers need to go through a customer workflow. And that is the on condition. And so I can preset in any of the filters that until it matches that criteria, it'll ignore the workflow. Or vice versa, you can, if it matches that criteria, it will ignore the workflow and everything else goes through the workflow. So those are the 2 pieces that you have a lot of control over to trigger when it happens and the conditions on when it happens. All right, let me just jump out of our slide show really quick. And hopefully everybody can see that. Grant, can you maybe confirm?
I can see. Yep.
Great. Okay. So obviously you can search for all these with your global search. I've just bookmarked them. You have the workflow where you would come in and I can create my new workflow or I can modify my workflows. You can also just bring up the templates so that you can read through here and see what templates are available to you and how you might want to use those. And of course, the most important one, this approval user setup. And again, this has to be populated before you start using any of the pre-built filters or workflows. And it's just any of the users that are going to send for approval, and then of course the users that are going to be doing the approval. They need to be in here. Most critical information is just the user ID, who is going to be the approver, the email, sorry, user ID, the email, and the salesperson. That's the three pieces that's critical. You don't need to fill out any of the rest of this unless you're going to use it in your approval, like the approval chain that we talked about. So in this case, you can see here that if I send a document for approval using the approval chain, my approver is Grant. So first thing that's going to happen is the approver is going to go to Grant, or the approval request is going to go to Grant for him to approve it. Now, I did have this limit of $50,000. So unless it's over 50,000, it won't go to Grant. Typically I would, in fact, I might even just have the wrong screen up. Let's just hop in here fast. That one looks a little backwards to me. Yeah, that's the way it's set up. This is probably in the wrong spot. So I'm going to put $1,000 here. And we're going to make it so that Grant can do 5,000. And ultimately, oops, it helps if you put it in right. So this lets me set the purchase approval for me. If it's over that $1,000, then it goes to Grant. Then you can set in here for Grant. Oh, that's why. He has unlimited, so he can approve regardless of the dollar amount, he can approve it. Now, Hank, he has a, oh, that's why this said 50,000. Sorry, guys and gals. And it's not 5,000, it's 50,000. Hank, I'm his approver, but Hank can put in up to 10,000. When it's over 10,000, it needs to go to me. And I can approve it up to 50,000. If it's over 50,000, it's going to kick it off to Grant, and Grant, who's the ultimate, has all the power. He can approve, be the final approval. So this is really helpful to just set up real easy controls as far as limits. You can also do it for sales orders. I just have it only set up for purchase orders. But this is where you can set up those easy limits so that it will flow through based on what kind of approval they're allowed to give. And again, you could do that with your sales orders so that a sales manager may be able to approve to a certain amount, but then after that, it has to go to someone in accounting who can approve higher dollar amounts for sales orders. Now, just really quick, and I did put a link just to show you that if I wanted to create a customer workflow, they have built an assisted setup for customers. And so I can come in and do right here. So I'm on the customer list. I come into actions, go to workflow, and says create workflow. When I press this, it's going to now walk me through an assisted setup that's very simple to do what I did and what I showed you in the workflow itself. But here's so I can say, okay, who's going to be approving customer cards? Well, Grant has to approve new or changes to customer cards. You can say, when do I want it to start? I want it to start when the user sends it, or I can say if they change a specific field. So if somebody were to say, try to change the credit limit, then it would automatically have to go to Grant. But if they change anything else, I don't care. And so as you walk through here, it's going to set up the workflow for you. Very basic. I'm done. And now I have a working workflow. Now you can do those assisted setups for any customer card, a vendor card, or an item card. And those are available. So if I went into a vendor, same type of thing, come into more options, go to my actions, go to my workflow, wherever they hit it. Yeah, I love when they move the buttons on us. Oh, I've already got one set up, that's why. So because I've got one set up, I don't get the option, but if you didn't have one, you'd have the same option that we had on customers by being able to go in and just do the assisted setup. Same thing for your item cards. Now, the one I sent you through was, really simple, and that is that we just simply went to workflows. I hit new workflow from a template, and of course I can choose the template I want and start from here. This gives me the ability to do a little more advanced. So now I can come in and I can decide when I want to do it, enter my filter details for the on condition, and of course set up how I want it to be approved, whether I want it to go through the chain, the direct approver, first qualified, specified, or if I wanted to use the workflow user groups. And once I set that up, then I can just enable it and go from there. All right. Okay, Grant, you told me this was really easy, so we'll see if I can get this to work just right. Or you might have to save me to bring our presentation back up.
I can grab it again and hand it off to Scott.
Let's see, it's just being really slow. There we go. A little slow pulling it up. Oh, and of course, Grant.
Does it have a, did it kick you back to the beginning?
Yeah, it kicked me back to the beginning. Let me push through here really fast, get us back to our dun, dun, dun. So one of the things that, there we go. So I did put in this slide, which is available to you. There's a video. This is a video resource that walks through how to do that customer vendor item. So you don't have to rely on the video just in here. There's also another great resource for setting up approval workflows. These are both Microsoft resources, and these are both links to those different resources. And then obviously we're available to help you set up and create those workflows. based on your own criteria. Okay, and that's the basic built-in workflows. I'll turn it over to you, Scott, for Power Automate.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. So what I'm going to go over is I'm going to go over Power Automate and the approval workflows and kind of tying them in together with Business Central. One of the main questions that I end up hearing quite a bit are, why do we want to use Power Automate versus Business Central? One of the main reasons why you want to use Power Automate, that's because Business Central has a lot of good workflow engines that'll do almost everything you want. But every once in a while, you're going to want to do a little bit extra. You might want some users who want to do Teams approvals. You might have to reach out to Dynamics CE for some data. You might have to reach out to like SharePoint to get a copy of an invoice document to attach it to the approval workflow to make it easier for end users to see the document without actually going into the system. You might also have an outside person that you want part of the approval process that isn't necessarily a Business Central user. Those are kind of the main reasons why we usually end up seeing people using Power Automate with it. And the nice part about Power Automate also is you can go on ahead and you can do complexities with it. So you can kind of make it as crazy as you want to make it. Okay, and one of the things, there's a couple of different ways you could set up these workflows. You can either set them up right within Business Central. The nice part about doing it this way is that, like if you're on the purchase invoice screen and you select to create a Power Automate flow based off of a template, it'll only show you the Power Automate templates that are actually associated to purchase documents. With where if you go into, the other way of doing it is go into Power Automate itself and you can view the templates. And that'll show you all the Business Central templates that are available by Microsoft currently. Nice part about doing it this way is that you can get some different ideas. Like every once in a while, you might be thinking about purchase orders, but not realizing that you actually need item approvals also. So you might want to set up some of those. Then, as Grant has already previously mentioned, it's the great part about it is regardless whether you're using Business Central or Power Automate, you can still use the same Business Central functions that you currently have natively baked in. And then, of course, and with what you're going to want to do when you start doing the Power Automate template is most of the time out of the box is not going to work perfect. And that's the whole reason why you're going with Power Automate. So you're going to want to go in and you're going to want to add some steps, do some changes, change the actual flow template. And figured that'd be a good point for me to jump in and show you guys actually how you can do it on a live demo. So let me share my screen here and we'll go through Business Central and I'll do a approval process based off of purchases invoice. Right, so let me just go over to our Business Central. And we'll view purchases invoices. So for purchases invoices that we might have just created, and we want to set up an approval process for this. But what we'd do is we'd go on ahead and hit your request approval if we're going through the Business Central route and not through the Power Automate template route, and we'll create a new flow for it. This will go on ahead and pop up the different flows that are associated to your purchases documents. And we can go on ahead and select the one that we want to do. So we want to go on ahead and create one for a purchases invoice. And with what it'll do, the first thing is it'll go on ahead and set up the different connections that you'll need. And with what you're going to need for this one is just a Dynamics 365 Business Central connection, a connection to approvals in the Power Platform, and also an Office 365 Outlook connection. And just as an FYI, the Power Automate license does come with your standard Business Central license. So as long as you have a Business Central license, you should have access to do this. Okay, so we go through, we'd set up our steps, we'd add in the different filter criterias. Like for this one, for example, we want to grab, if we were going to use the native out-of-the-box one, you'd grab a purchase document where it's an invoice, your status is open, and the amount, including VAT, is greater than 0. Unless you're wanting to send out $0 approvals also, then obviously you'd change that up and swap it out to a different condition. And you can add different filter criteria, as well as, like I was saying, you can reach out to external systems by adding in different steps, either through an HTTP action, if you're reaching out to an external e-commerce system. If you're reaching out to SharePoint, you could use the SharePoint task to grab information. Or if you were reaching out to CE, you can go on ahead and use a Dataverse connection and get information directly from Dataverse. And that's what I did to save a little bit of time is earlier today, I went on ahead and set up an approval process. So we could go on ahead and show you how it works. And here's our approval process flow that I created. So what you can do is you can see all of your history right from the main page. If we go into it, we can go on ahead and see which environments it's connected to, which in this one is connected to our JT Demos environment. You can see the company that's associated to, the document type, and how it's going to actually grab it. That's if any of this trigger criteria is not correct, it won't fire the flow for an approval process. So if we go back to Business Central, and in our purchase invoice document, we'll go on ahead and select to request an approval, and we'll send the approval request. This will go on ahead and trigger our flow, which we'll be able to see in a minute here. And it will show running within the flow history. So here's our running flow right now. And you probably didn't see it, but I went on ahead and got a notification on my other screen letting me know that an approval has been sent, as well as the person that you have set as the approval manager, whether you're getting that from Business Central or another system. We'll go on ahead and get the Teams communication for the approval, which we'll see here in the activities, which here's our approval request. And they'll also get an email associated to it, which they can go on ahead and approve from here. Or we can also approve it within the Teams approval. So we'll go on ahead and approve this request. Which then this will send a notification back to the original requester, letting them know that the invoice has been approved. And this one, since it's a demo environment, I went on ahead and used Hank as the approver and requester. I mean, obviously, normally you wouldn't do that, but I figured it'd be the easiest way to show both the requester and approver in the same screen. The other nice thing about it is that way they're getting a notification via Teams, via email, a pop-up on their screen. And also if they ever want to go see the historical approvals, like somebody said, oh, you have an approver still out there that you haven't approved, you can go out here, select any of the ones that are pending rather than approved or rejected, and you can go in and approve it. So hopefully it should limit down the conversation about people not seeing approvals in the timely manner. And you can also see historically what approvals you've approved and which ones you've rejected.
For me, sorry to interrupt, Scott. For me,
Yeah.
that's the big UI benefit to this is you have it either in Teams or email. People can just approve, decline right there in Teams or email. They don't have to jump into the system, and especially for users that are needing to be involved in an approval flow that may not have a BC license. That's the huge advantage right there, I think.
Agreed. That, and then with what it'll do is, and that's one of the problems with live demo, right? Normally, it's what would happen is it would cruise through the approval process. It'd go on ahead and execute the action against BC, and it would do whatever action you wanted within BC. In this case, it was supposed to be approving the workflow or the workflow endpoint for the purchases invoice. So normally that purchases invoice would then be reflecting that it has been, that it wouldn't be pending approval, but it would be approved instead. And in this slide, with what I've done is I've went on ahead and included Microsoft's Power Automate documentation and how to connect it with Business Central. And of course, we're always out here to help. So let us know if you want any custom connections between Business Central and other Microsoft products.